Okay, so I'm Nancy Shanteau, and thank you all for being so incredibly patient with me while we went through this terrible thing that I tested and tried to make sure worked beforehand. This webinar is going to offer you an introduction to relationship anarchy via the 9 principles from Andie Nordgren's short instructional manifesto of relationship anarchy. And we have a lovely presentation for you to follow along with lots of pictures. So Nordgren wrote the manifesto in 2006 in Sweden and provided the English translation herself. You can find the manifesto in the classroom, and you can also link to the Anarchist Library where it's published. You'll also find write-ups from me in the classroom that talk about each principle and how it relates to skills for change, which is a theory of change developed by Julia Kelleher and based on her study of radical therapy, somatic embodiment, Buddhism, and deep ecology. Skills for Change offers power-informed transaction-based analysis to help us understand how people relate and how to shift from rescues and power plays to autonomous cooperation. Oh, it's echoey, Jasmine. Hopefully that's not happening for everyone. This is just no fun. I wanted this to be much more fun. Okay, but you can still hear me, Micah, right? Okay. All right. So we're going to go through an agenda. The agenda I created for this webinar is to go through an introduction in my bio and why relationship anarchy. Then we'll go into the 9 principles, the key points and what's revolutionary about each of the principles, and then summarize and have a question and comment time. I am totally fine with you asking questions in the comments as we go along. I'll keep checking, and I'll do my best to check both the Zoom and the Rizuku. If you're having trouble listening in one, just mute one and listen in the other. So hopefully everybody can hear me. If you're having technical difficulties, I'm terribly, terribly sorry about that. And I can always make a recording of this and make it available as a video as well. So the real joy of this for me is actually being able to be here and have your questions come in. So you know, I can always make a video and talk to myself for an hour and a half. It's no problem. But it's much more fun for me that you all are here, even though it sucks to have technical difficulties. And then I'll talk a little bit about what's next, what I'm going to be offering to help people make these kinds of changes. So I'm glad that everybody is able to hear me great now. So that's good. Okay, so I'm going to do a little introduction. And I'm going to put up a picture of Andie Nordgren while I do it. So that's her lovely face. She's on Twitter. She's a game developer as well. She's not actually spending a ton of time doing relationship anarchy right now. Okay, so the short instructional manifesto for relationship anarchy was written in 2006 in Sweden. Andie Nordgren translated it herself. I'm the lineage bearer for Skills for Change. I'm a Strozzi Institute certified master somatic coach and the founder of the Folklam School, where I train and certify Skills for Change coaches. I co-wrote Access to Power, a radical approach for changing your life with Julia Kelleher and the other Skills for Change collective members. I have developed a cooperative fusion dance style with Debri Briones, and I am the culture and inclusion leader for the Foothills Fusion Dance community. I also have co-founded with Stephanie Hubbard a relationship anarchy group in Nevada County. So there, I'll put all kinds of links to all this stuff in the chat when I get a chance to actually stop doing this and put links. And you can also always message me if you have any questions about anything. I'd be happy to create opportunities for you to share information and to join groups and things like that so that we can be having a community conversation, because that's what's really important to me. One of the things about relationship anarchy is that we're thinking about things in terms of community instead of couples, and being able to create communities of practice is a really big way for us to work together and to make the changes that we want to make in the way that we relate. Something that's real and something that we can embody and do together. And as what I've noticed about communities of practice is that as the community changes, everybody gets this benefit from that exploration and people are exploring in all the directions, that information gets fed back into the community and the community gets richer and small and stronger as a result of that. So I really encourage all of us as we're trying to make these relational changes in whatever way we're making them, to be doing them within a community environment because it's so rich. So I'm a settler who lives and works in Nevada County, California. I'm on unceded Nishanan land. I identify as a bisexual, pansexual, aromantic, solo polyamorous relationship anarchist. I'm a white multi-ethnic woman and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a citizen of the United States. And I've dedicated my life to radical empowering education. I've been teaching and coaching since 2004, and I think people need safety, a feeling of connection and love in order to make changes. In a good relationship, teaching, coaching, or community, we become engaged in each other's dreams. We provide support, strength, and vision to help each other achieve our dreams. And that's what I hope to do in this course. I'll be using Skills for Change theory to present the 9 principles of relationship anarchy. As I understand it, the anarchy part of relationship anarchy is based on Nordgren's own queer anarchist community organizing and a desire to bring that praxis to how she related both intimately and in community. I learned about Nordgren's intent for the manifesto from an article she wrote for Milk magazine in 2008. She wrote that article in Swedish, and Alexander Surli kindly translated it from Swedish for English speakers. Based on the article, I think of the manifesto as Nordgren's attempt to combine the principles of autonomy, free association, mutual aid, and radical self-organization into principles that can be used to relate with others without coercion. Most people talk about this lack of power over others as non-hierarchy. However, Nordgren never uses these words in the manifesto. Instead, she talks about powerful norms, command and control, and entitlement. Since so many people come to relationship anarchy from normative relating models, we often bring existing hierarchical relating models with us. It's my philosophy that everyone can begin where they are and arrive at different stages of liberating their relationships based on their history and their existing commitments. In my vision of collective liberation, we co-create our relationships and communities based on our values. This means that of necessity, we need to unpack our relationship with the values and beliefs we inherited from our families and our cultures. Okay, I have a new slide for you. So this is remember these? Remember old-time telephone switchboards. I liken the process of culture creation to unplugging and replugging our values, beliefs, and preferences as we discover who we are and what we want. We often find ourselves indoctrinated and pressured into conformity by the norms that surround us. Through the conscious creation of our own culture, we create our connections. We might plug into something we learned in our childhood, and this time, instead of enacting a habit, we're making an informed, dignified choice. I created this webinar to help people understand what it means to empower yourself in your relationships and to break from the normative structures that dictate how we relate with each other. It's my vivid dream that we will co-create a new community model by liberating how we relate. Autonomous cooperation is my way of describing that model and what it requires of us. It requires that we have sufficient power to be autonomous, to know ourselves well enough to know what we want, and to have enough power to take responsibility for our needs. When I say that, I'm not saying that we have to meet all of our own needs, but that in being responsible for them, we can actually source our needs from our entire experience instead of focusing on one person to meet our needs. Cooperation describes the skills of co-creation and coexistence. Our lives would be inordinately difficult if we did not rely on each other. How we manage to coexist without harming each other and co-create without controlling each other necessitates that we understand how to enact our boundaries, communicate, negotiate, and create agreements. All right, let's get started with the 9 principles. As we discuss each principle, I'll read Nordgren's words to you and then discuss the key ideas. We're going to have to go pretty quickly. We'll try and get all 9 principles into the discussion within the next 60 minutes. And I'll keep an eye out for your questions and comments in the chat. So hopefully by the end, we'll have a lively interchange on these topics. So if everybody would just put something in the chat right now, maybe your mood, that would be great. I would get to see that I can see your comments. All right, let's jump into the manifesto. First principle. Yay, Kate's spacious. Inquisitive. I like that. I'm excited. Okay, love is abundant and every relationship is unique. Relationship anarchy questions the idea that love is a limited resource that can only be real if restricted to a couple. You have capacity to love more than one person in one relationship, and the love felt for that person does not diminish love felt for another. Don't rank and compare people in relationships. Cherish the individual and your connection to them. One person in your life does not need to be named primary for the relationship to be real. Each relationship is independent and a relationship between autonomous individuals. So here are the key points here. Awesome. People have many definitions of love. I like to think of it as an action. If you're outside, bring tacos. Action more than feeling. So what does love do? Abundance is sometimes critiqued as idealistic. Given social capital, people often have different levels of access to sex, love, and connection with others. I prefer to think about the abundance of love as a felt experience of connection that can begin with our bodies, our experience of our sensations and our emotions, and the natural world around us. Nordgren is making the distinction that limiting our experience of love to only couples-based romantic and sexual relating is unnecessary and diminishes the richness of our experience as social beings. We have the opportunity to value each and every connection with another human being without ranking one as better or more important than another. What's a relationship? Do you have a minimum connection with someone in order to consider yourself in a relationship with them? Do you have a maximum level of entitlement beyond which you would not want to do? With the word primary, Nordgren is hinting at the polyamory community's use of hierarchical relating to reproduce many monogamous norms. And Nordgren is bringing in the idea of relationship independence. She'll address this quite often in the manifesto, as well as the idea that individuals are autonomous and making the choice to relate on their own. So we're making a distinction about individuals choosing relationships rather than it being something that the relationship is more important than the individual. What's revolutionary about this idea? Serial monogamy makes people desperate to find love in the form of coupled up relationships, to hold onto it once they have it, and to consider themselves failures if they lose it. Love becomes a scarce resource. We diminish the many forms of connection we receive throughout our lives and elevate this one type of romantic, sexual, coupled up love as the only kind that matters. Dr. Elizabeth Brake, in her book Minimizing Marriage, called this overfocus on romantic and sexual love amatonormativity. We don't have to agree to this limitation. We can understand that all the love and relationships we share with people are valuable and special, and we don't have to elevate our romantic and sexual activities as the activities that dictate who we relate with. We can think about our relationships based on something else, like trust, which is what I think the heart of the manifesto is really pointing us at, is that organizing our relationships around trust produces immense possibilities for getting the needs that we have and also the things that we want to do done in our lives with a variety and wonderful set of connections with many people instead of focusing on just one person to meet all of our needs. Okay, let's move on to the second principle. And love is abundant. Every relationship is unique. Maybe post something in the chat about what love is to you. So what I defined love as actions. What does love mean to you? We're going to talk about love some more. Love and respect instead of entitlement. Deciding not to base a relationship on a foundation of entitlement is about respecting others' independence and self-determination. Mutual respect. I like that one. Your feelings for a person or your history together does not make you entitled to command and control a partner to comply with what is considered normal to do in a relationship. Explore how you can engage without stepping over boundaries and personal beliefs. Rather than looking for compromises in every situation, let loved ones choose paths that keep their integrity intact without letting this mean a crisis for the relationship. Staying away from entitlement and demands is the only way to be sure that you are in a relationship that is truly mutual. Love is not more real when people compromise for each other because it's part of what's expected. I agree. Love is like expansiveness and connection. Thanks for contributing. So here's the key points. Nordgren returns to this idea of independence and contrasts it with entitlement, which she continues to elaborate as when we command and control a partner to comply with what is considered normal. The link between control and normativity has now been firmly established. In order to not step over others' boundaries and personal beliefs, we need to know what they are. It is necessary for us to identify ours and to make sure we understand other people's. Nordgren further defines compromise as less valuable than individual integrity. This is the opposite of a normative relating style where the relationship is more important than the individual. When she says, let loved ones choose paths that keep their integrity intact without letting this mean a crisis for the relationship, Nordgren is pointing to the ways in which normative values pit our personal integrity against togetherness, and that focus on togetherness requires individual sacrifice. She'll return to this idea later. She's making mutuality the goal. It cannot coexist with entitlement, demands, and command and control. Nordgren challenges the idea that real love requires sacrifice, compromise, and again situates this requirement in terms of normative expectations. So what's evolutionary about this idea? The entrenched normative pattern of relating, the entrenched normative pattern of valuing one relationship as most important over all others, and then using that importance to control people's behavior is directly challenged by this principle. Instead of thinking of sacrifice or control as a given, Nordgren is relabeling these normative relational practices as entitlement and contrasting them with mutuality and integrity. She's flipping the valuation away from the couple and back to the individual and identifying co-created, non-coercive mutual relationships as of the greatest value. To me, this is directly challenging the tendency in Western culture to objectify people, to devalue their needs and preferences, and to treat them like property. If a relationship is more important than an individual, it must be protected, and that gives the members of the relationship the right to control another person. This kind of socially normalized control is designed to prioritize and protect the couple, and thus protect the person who benefits most from the monogamous coupledom, which was historically the husband. As culture has changed, monogamous coupling has given wives and mothers a lot of power to control the lives of children, and this prioritization can be devastating now to fathers. And I'm talking about heteronormative about this. When we start to queer our relationships, we're actually opening up all of these control mechanisms, and that's very threatening to this normative structure. The roots of monogamous coupledom reside in patrimony, where the property and money of the father was passed to the eldest son. Women couldn't own property, and women and children were essentially treated as property of their husbands. The default of this traditional model still results in disempowerment of women through lower salaries, assignment of household responsibility through division of labor primarily to women, and loss of years of career building due to primary childbearing responsibilities. Now, I think this in a decolonized context actually reflects our tendency to objectify ourselves, separate ourselves, and turn everything into property. So the fact that we think we can own land, that we can draw property boundaries on it, that people can buy rights to things like water and air, that kind of binary breaking up of the world and turning everything into property is actually, colonizing, destructive, hegemonic, hierarchical, dominance. It's using threat of violence to control people. It produces genocide, slavery, all kinds of isms, the othering of people, making the real people and the not real people, and the ability to enter into war and all kinds of things. So I'm saying that our way of control, like our structure by which we are saying we are willing to enter into normative control, David Schnarch called it ordinary marital masochism. That process, as much as it might feel good sometimes, is actually inherently going to produce some pretty destructive dynamics between people pretty quickly. Marriage conveys between 6,000 and 9,000 rights to people, depending on the state that you live in. The centralizing of marriage, family values, and racial nationalism makes traditional gender roles necessary for the continuance of the white race and the preservation of white male dominance. Relationship anarchy is radical in that it threatens these pillars of social control and normativity. It decenters the nuclear family and prioritizes the rights and preferences of the individual. This all happens when we start to do away with coercion and entitlement. So this second principle, it's radical. It's big time. So what does entitlement mean to you? And how do you relate with entitlement? Go ahead and put something in the chat. And I'm going to keep going. Oh, here's the marriage rights and benefits. I pulled this off of Nolo Press. Here's the third principle, privilege. Yeah. Find your core set of relationship values. So we're getting out of the weeds and starting to think about what we want. How do you wish to be treated by others? What are your basic boundaries and expectations on all relationships? What kind of people would you like to spend your life with? And how would you like your relationships to work? Find your core set of values and use it for all relationships. Don't make special rules and exceptions as a way to show people you love them for real. The key points here, Nordgren again invites relationship anarchists to identify their basic boundaries and expectations. If we aren't going to relate based on norms, we have to establish our own core values. She reiterates that special rules and exceptions don't make love real. What's revolutionary about this idea? We aren't depending on norms to decide our relational goals for us. We must do the work for ourselves. Nordgren is moving cultural expectations and roles out of the central positioning that ensures status quo adherence to social norms and centers once again on the preferences, beliefs, and values of the individual. There's that theme. I stayed up until 3 a.m. last night, y'all, making this slide presentation. I hope you appreciate it. Pretty pictures. Okay. When I created my own relational values document, it spanned 10 pages and covered topics from the starting principle around which I wanted to relate, which is freedom, and considered everything from whether I would be willing to participate in a public celebration of a relationship, absolutely not, to how I wanted to exchange sexual health information before sharing sexually, and what kind of relationship I wanted to have with other people's kids. When I look back on the document now, it's still pretty amatonormative. One of the things that happens to us when we are differing from norms is that our ways of relating can end up being defined by the norm even as an alternative. One of the things I really value about relationship anarchy is the community of practice. When I share how I RA with somebody else and they share how they RA with me, we start to learn about what we want, how we might conduct relating in a community-centered way. We're absolutely going to have to co-create this, folks. So let's jump into the fourth principle. And why don't you go ahead and put something in the chat about what your values are? What are your core values? Heterosexism is rampant and out there, but don't let fear lead you. Remember that there is a very powerful normative system in play that dictates what real love is and how people should live. Many will question you and the validity of your relationships when you don't follow these norms. Work with the people you love to find escapes and tricks to counter the worst of the problematic norms. Find positive counterspells and don't let fear drive your relationships. I see a lot of honesty in the chat box, kindness, compassion, mutuality, co-creation, curiosity. Those are good values. I like them. Okay, key points. Heterosexism, defined from Wikipedia. Heterosexism is a system of attitudes, bias, and discrimination in favor of opposite sex sexuality and relationships. It can include the presumption that other people are heterosexual or that opposite sex attractions and relationships are the only norm and therefore superior. Nordgren directly calls out the anti-queer bias of monogamy and mainstream culture here for the first time and stakes out relationship anarchy as explicitly queer territory. She is naming all of the ways queer people relate as valid and also elevating queer theory about relationships. We get the idea of queer platonic partnerships, distrust of gay marriage as an appropriation of monogamy culture instead of a deeper queering of the whole culture of relating as direct inheritances from queer theory and practice. Nordgren's offering escapes, tricks, and counterspells to counter the worst of the problematic norms. She's naming fear as a key driver of normative behavior, and perhaps referring here to people staying closeted, the harmful mental effects of anti-LGBTQIA plus phobias, and the way in which, as people start to relate alternatively, they start to get attacked. And she's saying, don't let fear lead you. We can do this together. What's revolutionary about this idea? As a bisexual, pansexual woman who is much more actively engaged in the queer community now than when I discovered relationship anarchy, I can't help but credit the relationship anarchy community with the deep unwinding of my own internalized heterosexism. I didn't know much about aromanticism before I joined the RA Facebook group, so I put a little infographic up for you all to check it out. Learning about aromanticism led me to understand my own wiring much more deeply. And I'm going to tell a little story about myself here. I don't think that everybody is aromantic. I don't think everybody is asexual, but the relationship anarchy community creates this environment in which there's all this exploration happening. And as we are participating in that exploration, we might start to discover things about us, and those things that we discover will change how we relate, and it keeps changing us. So I'm giving some examples from my own life so that you can see how practicing relationship anarchy has changed me and get an idea for it. I'm absolutely not preaching that you should find the same exact thing true about yourself. When I realized that my extremely rare feelings of desire to connect with someone romantically could explain both my past relationships and also explain why I reached out so seldom to others, I began to reinvent how I conceived of connecting. I shifted my behavior and instantly started connecting more deeply with women and trans folks as potential lovers and friends. I would not have made this cosmic leap in a positive direction without teaching relationship anarchy. It was when I included an asexuality glossary and attempted to explain aromanticism to the group that I began to reflect on my own life and desire levels. These realizations are still unfolding for me. I recently began to apply this thinking to my friendships and realized once again I had allowed myself to leave a vacuum of desire. Instead of deciding who I wanted to be friends with and reaching out for those friendships, I was effectively waiting for someone else to express interest in me. The queer community already has many escapes, tricks, and counterspells, and relationship anarchy deeply embraces and centers queer theory. Are the slides going to be available after this meeting? Yes, I will make this a downloadable presentation. You're welcome. Okay, the fifth principle. Build for the lovely unexpected. Being free to be spontaneous, to express oneself without fear of punishments or a sense of burden shoulds, is what gives life to relationships based on relationship anarchy. Organized based on a wish to meet and explore each other, not on duties and demands and disappointment when they're not met. What are the key points? Once you dismantle social norms, you open to the unexpected. This lovely principle invites us to develop our freedom in relationship to time and creative exploration. Nordgren contrasts the joy of exploration with fear of punishments, burden shoulds, and duties and demands and disappointment. Once again, she is offering mutuality instead of role-based relating. Though she doesn't say this directly, there's an invitation to meet and explore each other that implies that when we approach each other in terms of conforming to expectations, we actually tend to miss getting to know the uniqueness of the other person. So what's revolutionary about this idea? In this case, I believe Nordgren is inviting us to change our relationship with time and our calendars. Instead of planning every detail of our lives and interviewing people for predetermined roles, she's inviting us to explore the adventure of getting to know each other and the creative possibilities that emerge from that process. So this slide is about polychromatic and monochromatic time, which I think is this interesting opportunity to relate to time relationally instead of monochromatically. And I'm going to keep going. There's another slide I want to show you. So while this principle seems lighthearted and sweet, build for the lovely and expected, it points to the alienation of time and schedules, the way that wage labor makes us slaves to jobs and bosses and diminishes our ability to play. If we really embody this principle, what might we dismantle, creating a life that is open to the lovely unexpected? So I didn't ask you to post anything in the chat from the last time. So if there's anything about fear, what you're afraid of in confronting oppressive norms, you could post that in the chat, or you could post something about the lovely unexpected in the chat, how you bring the lovely unexpected into your life and what that even means to you. All right, the sixth principle. I think we're coming to the heart of the Relationship Anarchy Manifesto here. Oh. Fake it till you make it. Sometimes it can feel like you need to be some complete superhuman to handle all the norm breaking involved in choosing relationships that don't map to the norm. A great trick is the fake it till you make it strategy. When you are feeling strong and inspired, Think about how you would like to see yourself act. Transform that into some simple guidelines and stick to them when things are rough. Talk to and seek support from others who challenge norms, and never reproach yourself when the norm pressure gets you into behavior you didn't wish for. Key points. Nordgren is reminding us that norm breaking is hard work, and that holding ourselves to standards of perfection is rather normative and life-draining. She offers the trick to do some visioning work when strong and inspired, then creating guidelines and acting according to them, especially when things are rough. Many relationship anarchists say community, not couples. And here, Nordgren's reminding us that help from the community is extremely helpful in support of our work challenging the norms. Not to be hard on ourselves when we make mistakes. Normative culture is habitual and embodied, and it takes time to unlearn. So what's revolutionary about this idea? I love fake it till you make it, because as a somatic coach, I know that it takes 300 repetitions to get something into muscle memory and 3,000 repetitions to switch from one behavior to another. Some relationship anarchists are intolerant of people unlearning normative culture and the mistakes they make as they transition. I understand this. Once we have shifted our own relationship with oppressive norms, it can be painful to encounter them in relationship with newbies. Still, if we're not patient with each other as we learn, change, and grow, we cannot get anywhere. Liberation is not a destination, it's a process. We're faking it and teaching ourselves how to get better at living autonomous and cooperative lives and relationships, and eventually we start to make it. I'm going to check out some of your answers here. Judgment, ostracization, other people's BS, abandonment, creating space for mistakes feels so important. Yes, I totally agree. All right, seventh principle. We're getting close, y'all. Trust is better. Choosing to assume that your partner does not wish you harm leads you down a much more positive path than a distrustful approach where you need to be constantly validated by the other person to trust that they are there with you in the relationship. Sometimes people have so much going on inside themselves that there's just no energy left to reach out and care for others. Create the kind of relationship where withdrawing is both supported and quickly forgiven, and give people lots of chances to talk, explain, see you, and be responsible in the relationship. Remember your core values and to take care of yourself. So what are the key points? Nordgren's pointing out that distrustful stories require a lot of labor to overcome. People might not have the energy to connect with others, and when this happens, withdrawal does the least harm. Rather than making their actions about us, we support and quickly forgive and listen to other people. This allows them to explain, understand, and show up as responsible participants. Nordgren leaves us with a reminder that our boundaries are crucial to not getting taken advantage of when relating to others. So what's revolutionary about this idea? Other people's actions are often not about us. People are living their lives based on their own experience rather than based on us. This is true. We can support people to take care of themselves, assume that they aren't doing us harm on purpose, and listen to understand before sharing to be understood. This approach increases the possibility that everyone can be witnessed and be responsible for themselves in relating to others. Nordgren's softening of the high demands around the one, romantic and sexual relationships that are supposed to meet all of our needs is counterbalanced by a reminder that we now have identified our own core values and are responsible for taking care of ourselves. If someone crosses a boundary, it's up to us to respond by taking space. I just want to say this idea of focusing on trust seems to me to be the center, the very heart of the Relationship Anarchy Manifesto. When we are allowing ourselves to focus on the one, we're thinking that everybody that we already know isn't it. And that process means that we're looking for somebody new to fall in love with, which can produce wonderful experiences. And it's often like a roller coaster. We end up with new relationship energy, which is the big chemical change. Our serotonin level drops, and then we get these dopamine hits from connecting with someone. And often that leads us to overcommit before we know someone. So changing the focus from the relationship to the individual, and then from some sort of magical, passionate connection that is mysterious and ineffable, and changing that to trust is a huge difference in the fundamental reasons why we would relate with people. So go ahead, and I forgot about fake it till you make it. Go ahead and put anything that you're faking till you're making in the chat box, or anything that you're working on developing trust around. And I'll go on to the next principle. So the eighth principle, we're getting close to the end, change through communication. For most human activities, there is some form of norm in place for how it is supposed to work. If you want to deviate from this pattern, you need to communicate. Otherwise, things tend to end up just following the norm as others behave according to it. Communication and joint actions for change is the only way to break away. Radical relationships must have conversation and communication at the heart, not as a state of emergency only brought out to solve problems. Communicate in a context of trust. We are so used to people never think and feel that we have to read between the lines and extrapolate to find out what they really mean. But such interpretations can only build on previous experiences, usually based on the norms that you want to escape. Ask each other about stuff and be explicit. Trusting myself to take care of myself. Yeah, that's a good one. So what are the key points? Change can't come unless we talk about it. Otherwise, if we are following our own values and beliefs, others will interpret our behavior in terms of the norm. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Those of you in the polyamory community might recognize that principle. Once we've communicated, we take joint actions for change. It's in the actions we take where we determine if we are understanding each other. Communicating only when there are problems leaves us recreating the norms. We have to focus on what we want and then co-create it. Problem-based communication is all about fixing things. When we're stressed, we're trying to return to homeostasis. This is not a good time to envision a different way of relating. Communicating only about problems is a formula for solving them with known solutions. And known solutions will likely dump us back into normative territory in our relationships. Nordgren's being really smart here because she's not only talking about the way we follow the norms, unless we choose something different, she also talks about how we interpret others according to the norms. This is a double dismantling of the norms, both in our own values and then in the stories we tell ourselves about others. It's really important to learn skills for reflective listening, where we share what we heard in our own words, and we develop multiple ways of saying something to help others understand us. And the big takeaway here is be explicit. What do you mean? How does that show up in your actions? How do you want to relate, and how do you want to be understood? Practice, iterate, try again. What's revolutionary about this idea? Many of us know that communication is crucial to make relationships work. I think the link between communication and our ability to actually change how we do our relating is a key factor here. This means we have to figure ourselves out, share where we're coming from, make sure others understand us, listen to them, make sure we understand them, and then act. From there, we check in, make sure we got what we intended, and refine. This process takes us from norms into new territory, and it can be pretty amazing how fast it can happen. During the new relationship energy stage, here's a comic from Kim She Cuddles by Tick Wolf. During the new relationship energy stage of relating, sometimes we can stumble over our interpretations of what the other person is doing and what it means. As we build trust, we can smooth out the rough transactions and make things work much better. Communication is key every step of the way. This means we need time to talk, reflect on what we've heard, and clarify what that means for how we relate. Don't be afraid. It gets easier the more you do it. All right, so put something in about how you'd like to change through communication into the chat box. And here we go, ninth principle. Customize your commitments. Life would not have much structure or meaning without joining together with other people to achieve things. Constructing a life together, raising children, owning a house, or growing together through thick and thin. Such endeavors usually need lots of trust and commitment between people to work. Relationship anarchy is not about never committing to anything. It's about designing your own commitments with the people around you and freeing them from norms dictating that certain types of commitments are a requirement for love to be real, or that some commitments, like raising children or moving in together, have to be driven by certain kinds of feelings. Start from scratch and be explicit about what kind of commitments you want to make with other people. What are the key points here? Some people mistake freedom for lack of commitment. Nordgren reminds us that we can build a life with someone without controlling them. Our commitments are more likely to serve us when they emerge from our work defining our values, beliefs, and preferences. I love the phrase start from scratch. It reminds me that there is a dismantling process that comes first. We are not starting from a blank page. We're starting from an oppressive role-based norm that is designed to create unhealthy power dynamics in our relationships. Once we've dismantled the norms, we can start to dream a new future, one that involves doing things that enrich our lives with the people we trust. What's revolutionary about this idea? Freedom-based commitment is powerful. When we're doing what we want with people we trust, we're able to create relationships, ways of doing things, and experiences that seem magical and impossible. Truly, so many of the ideas of creating community problems that the couple is supposed to handle end up freeing us from obligation and too much work. The nuclear family model is fundamentally scarce. There's just too much work for two adults. Look at how people used to bring in the hay. This is a painting by Peter Brija, I don't know how to pronounce it, the junior, called the Hay. I'm not remembering the name. Anyways, I have it in the notes. The nuclear family model is fundamentally scarce. There's just too much work for two adults. When the Radical Therapy Collective lived together, they determined it took 8 adults to eliminate scarcity in a household with children. That is extraordinary. No wonder we're too tired to tear down these oppressive cultural systems and start over. When we share the labor of living in larger groups, everything gets done more easily. People are freed up to share their gifts and do what they want, and there are enough powerful adults to do what is needed. We are rapidly facing an automated social order that will need fewer and fewer hands to create what we need and want. It is time to recreate the way we think about life. Relationship anarchists are currently practicing how to do this ahead of the changes that are coming. We're becoming nimble and successful at doing the work of dismantling norms so we can dream of futures that meet all of our needs and free us to imaginatively create what we want together. In my experience, when people are relating by choice, we do amazing things for each other in a spirit of joy. Who doesn't want more of that? So go ahead and put in the chat box what kinds of commitments you want to make with people. So here we are, the 9 principles of relationship anarchy. As I wrote this talk, I became re-inspired. Nordgren's simple distilling of these principles seemed so obvious when I first read through them. Yet over the course of years, I can attest to the ways in which my life keeps getting remade. I can't tell you what will happen to you. Your path involves self-exploration, discovery, and transformation, and it's going to be very different from mine. Yet what I've observed in the greater relationship anarchy community is that we get very good at staying in our own lane, articulating what we want, and supporting each other to take care of ourselves, and then anyone who wants to can offer help to others. Mutual aid is one of the key values of anarchy that keeps me coming back to the relationship anarchy community. Our creativity is boundless, and what we can do together is exponentially greater than anything any one of us is capable of alone. May we discover what is possible through the simple, extraordinary practice of liberating our relations. So thank you. I wanted to read what you all put in the chat box. Listening without reaction, not getting so angry, commitment to support one another, taking care of myself and listening, taking care of myself and listening. Yes. This is just the beginning. Once we start to explore the manifesto, we start to embody these principles and practices. And as we explore that with other people, listening to their stories, we start to discover opportunities and options that we may never have thought of. What I'd like to do now is open up the conversation to comments and questions. You can post thoughts in the chat and I'll scroll through and respond. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about what's next for if you wanted to keep learning with me, all of the different kinds of options that are available in the relationship anarchy community, and what you can do if you want to get involved in starting to redesign your own life and your own commitments and your own relationships. I'm glad that it feels normalizing. Thanks. Yeah, it's extremely relieving. So I'm going to stay on this for now. So one of the stories I wanted to tell was when I started relating using the ideas of relationship anarchy, I thought I knew how to relate autonomously and independently. I've been studying skills for change since 2004, and skills for change is a power-informed approach to making life changes. I've been working with couples since 2009. We already in Skills for Change are familiar with creating extraordinary solutions to people's problems and helping people figure out how to do things like separate their romantic and sexual relating from living together and continue to live together and raise children, and or makes, stay married and separate their living situations or their sleeping situations so that things are working better. All of these kinds of creative solutions. And for the first little while with Relationship Anarchy, I really did feel like I knew what I was doing, and that people would say anarchy changed your life, and I would say, well, it's nice to be in a community where other people think this way. And I didn't really feel a huge amount of impact on my own life and the way I was relating. I felt like I had the tools that I needed. And then I started to change. And it took, probably a year and a half, 2 years of participating in the Relationship Anarchy community. When I discovered aromanticism, I started to engage in, like I said, more queer practice, more queer relationships, and more queer community. I'm now starting to explore my friendships and how I want my friendships to change. And I also started creating more community offerings. I had already been participating in the local fusion dance community, bringing the Culture and Inclusion Project out to the community, rather than it being something that I was doing on my own. I formed a team around that. I started really thinking about mentoring people and building people's skills in the community. Like, I don't have to do everything. Other people can do things. And I can start to hold it and then hand it off. And as I do that, there's more skilled people. And as there's more skilled people, I start to have compatriots and people that I can do things with instead of having to do things for others. So I would say that if you decide to embark on exploring liberating your relationships, Relationship Anarchy community is a really great place to do it. There are some ways in which the Relationship Anarchy community might seem like it's gatekeeping itself. I think that's really common in anarchist communities. What I would say to you is, I want all of us to be able to liberate how we relate. And we have to start from where we are. We can't actually liberate our relating if we're trying to get to the end of the street from the beginning of the street. We actually have to travel the street. So, and what I discovered is that every time I liberated something in my life, every time I accomplished something, what was possible changed and what I wanted changed. And so I could never have predicted what I was going to want or what I was going to become from the old way of being. And so this doesn't have to be it can seem really scary to embark into Relationship Anarchy and choosing to relate in terms of mutuality and focus on the individual rather than control and focus on the couple. And you don't have to change something if you don't want to. You get to listen to yourself. The idea isn't to make shoulds about idealism or about the destination into another weapon to oppress ourselves with. The idea is to offer ourselves the opportunity to explore what it would be like to be more free. What does it mean for us to relate without control and to focus on trust and to have a positive story about the people that we love instead of assuming that they're taking something away from us to give it to somebody else, for example? So I think I'm going to stop there. I'm going to answer some questions, and I really appreciate all of you for being here. And then I'll talk a little bit about next steps. So aromantic. So do I have a good resource? There's a lot of resources on aromanticism. The asexuality spectrum is the source of all of the information that I use. The is a really great resource. I learned, so I created a set of glossaries for the Relationship Anarchy course I taught. I've taught twice now. And it's a 6-month course where we go through the manifesto and really drill down into all of the words that are in the manifesto and really start to get an answer for what that is for ourselves. And I also pair all of the principles with skills for change skills. So if you're interested in skills for change, it's a great way to combine that interest. So aromanticism for me, aromanticism and asexuality, the spectrum is about not feeling desire, which is kind of like, I saw a comic when I was looking for the stuff I was going to put into this slideshow that says, going to a pond and trying to describe what's not there is like trying to describe how you don't feel desire. For me, when somebody would want to connect intimately with me or want to connect in a romantic way with me, the way that I would feel their desire, and then I would perform a response and think I was giving it back to them. And I knew that I wasn't actually feeling it. I wasn't feeling the desire to connect with them in the way that they were feeling it for me. So, and realizing that actually even extends to friendship, that I want friends. Wanting friends is different from feeling desire. Like, I don't feel like I need to see anybody, but if I stopped seeing somebody that I really valued, I would miss them. I might start to feel desire to connect with them. And it's really low for me to feel that desire. So I tend to have to kind of think what I want and then act, rather than having it be a feeling motivated. Like, I'm not getting myself over the hump of action based on an impulse to see somebody, or like a desperate feeling of desire. I do end up experiencing new relationship energy when I am starting to connect with somebody, and it fades fast for me. So I don't know if that is enough of an explanation of what aromanticism is. There's a book by Michonne Neal called, so we talk about ourselves as Eros, A-R-O-S, Eros, Eros, E-R-O-S, and Eros, A-R-R-O-W-S, where she talks about, I'm sorry, Z talks about Zir's approach, because Z is intersex. So Z talks about Zir's experience being aromantic in that book. All right. And please feel free, if you have any questions about how relationship anarchy might apply to your life or your relationships, feel free to post something in the chat and I'll respond. So what's next? I'm creating a course called Changing How We Relate. It's going to start on Thursday, February 13th, the day before Valentine's Day. And it's about the skills of autonomous cooperation. Now, this is 2 sessions, 13th and 27th, from 4 to 5:30. It's an interactive webinar with me. And instead of it being something where I'm just talking like this, you can ask questions, we get to check in. And the idea that I have for this is not to create a course that teaches you how to do everything that you would need to know how to do, but kind of lays out what are the key learnings that I've experienced from relationship anarchy community, things like amatonormativity, how to relate from trust, how to manage new relationship energy, how to manage differences in desire level, what to do with jealousy. I'm going to lay all of that out like a smorgasbord, and then kind of cover the broad range of all of the resources that are available, cooperative communication, talking about power and transactions like the rescue dynamic. I'll talk about them relatively fast and point people in the right direction. And it's going to, that's obviously, I can't teach all of that stuff in 2 hour-and-a-half sessions. So this is much more of an introduction to what are what do I think people need to know about in order to embark on starting to relate without control. So if you're relating without control, you're not using roles to decide how the relationship is structured, and you're making your own relational agreements. And that means you're starting from 100% of what you want and 100% of what the other person wants. And those agreements can change. So if we're not based on roles, then somebody comes home and they say, I want to do X, Y, and Z thing. And, we're no longer saying you can't do that. I'm going to threaten you if you try and do that. We're saying, you know, my range of choices is from my boundary. This is how I want to relate, and I'm not willing to relate in that way, or to it's fine for you to relate that way. I don't want to relate that way. And how do we make enough space around that kind of behavior? Or is there an agreement that we can make that would allow both of us to feel autonomous in our lives, so that we're not using rules and control in order to create safety? Because that doesn't tend to work. People don't feel chosen when we're creating rules. What they feel is that the rule is the only thing keeping the person from doing what they want. And and we tend to focus on that rather than the fact that the person is saying yes to the rule. Even if, like, the person is trying to say yes to us, the person is trying, still does not feel like we're being chosen. So it's really important for us to be thinking about and relating from like, what are the actual tactical specific strategies of how do we start to relate in relationship anarchy. And I am not saying that relationship anarchy is automatically polyamorous. It's not automatically that people are going to share themselves with other people. What it is that you figure out how you want to relate. So, and we're divesting from a structure that grants command and control over other people. So how does that change what we do? How does that change? Like, we make some agreements about how we're going to live together, and then somebody decides they want to, you know, join a rock band, and they're practicing, you know, 7 nights a week from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock. That's a big change. So, you know, what do you do when somebody makes a big change like that? Yeah, it does. It's good that it doesn't, is you're not a failure for being in a couple or wanting that. I mean, I really, honestly, the process by which many relationship anarchists and many polyamorists are doing something they call nesting, where they have a nesting partner. And I think as soon as we start to entangle our lives with other people, it increases the pressure to try and control each other. So we're trying to get what we want by controlling the other person. And I think we need a lot of space in both our logistical structure in the building, and also space in our entanglements to make sure that we have enough choice. So like, if you create combined bank accounts, for example, and you decide to entangle your finances with somebody, and they decide they want to start, you know, going out and spending $500 a month on snowboarding, and, you know, is that something they have to talk to you about? Is that a like a we decision, or is that a them decision? And that kind of entanglement is complicated. How we manage to deal with situations, like, the more that you create structures that are holding the container of the relationship, the more that you create agreements that are holding the container of the relationship, that your agreements are based on the past, the more that you're adding a potential for control into the dynamic. So how do we protect ourselves from that control? You know, people will talk about descriptive versus prescriptive hierarchy, and I understand that that feels like it's possible. And I think it's very challenging to be incredibly entangled, like living in the same room with the same bed. If you know, that kind of entanglement can actually produce a lot of, you know, if somebody starts to change, say they start to snore, and it's affecting us, it affects it affects how we're relating. So the more that we are building structures that give us space to be independent and autonomous, the more that we're likely to succeed at it. And what can we do if we make a choice? Say, for example, people can't afford to live anywhere other than in a studio apartment with one bed. How are they going to make autonomous decisions under the circumstances? That's right. Yeah, totally. Entanglement, norms are presented as if that's what love looks like, and it doesn't actually feel like that. That was what I found when I started. Before I had found relationship anarchy, I called myself a confirmed bachelor, and part of the reason I did that was because I realized that I wasn't likely to still like anybody that I was trying to share a bedroom with, and that actually even sharing a whole house with somebody, I'm not likely to like them very much, because I want to have control over my space, and I want to have control over how it's decorated and whether or not there's sound in it, and all of those kinds of things affect our ability to, and some people are really good at that and some people are less good at that. So being able to just be honest with ourselves about how the entanglements that we've chosen, that, like, Nordgren talks about this in the last principle, customizing our commitments. How do we do things with people without control? And I think we're really good at that in Skills for Change, because we have a clear understanding of how to create cooperative agreements. The cooperative process is ask for 100% of what you want and then negotiate agreements. And it also means that your yes and your no is your source of power. And we have to have our boundaries, as well as what our agreements are that we would like, what our 100% is, in order to be able to navigate autonomous cooperation successfully. Okay, I feel like I've been talking for a while. So this next class starts on the 13th. I created a buddy pass today. So if you go and sign up for that class, you'll get an email that invites you to send in, you'll give me an email address and I'll add them to the class. So that basically halves the cost. I also have a Patreon, and I have unlimited classes for $55 a month. So if you're interested in any of that, the classes that are going on right now are cooperative communication. Managing anxiety is going to start soon. No, we're in the middle of it. Managing anxiety, we're on the second. We have done one, and we're going to do one more. And then there's a coaches and practitioners training, a workshop if you're a coach or a practitioner. And there's a class called Crossing the Threshold, which is all about working through anything that's in the way of our own belonging. So it might be things like our embodied stress and rage in our or trauma that's stored in our bodies. It might be dealing with despair, whatever kinds of experiences that are, what is in the way between you and feeling like you belong. And I'm going to start this class next month. The other classes I teach, there's a art of planning class. There's a there's a energy awareness class. There's a class on quieting your mind. I'll teach the big relationship anarchy class. Usually I start that in the summer. So there's a lot of classes that are happening all the time. And when people sign up with me, they can get into past classes. So, and I encourage you also, if you are interested in more writing like this, more classes like this, getting on my Patreon and becoming a follower. That doesn't cost you anything. So I really appreciate all of you for being here. If anybody has any other questions, I'll hang out for a few more minutes. And until then, thank you so much for coming. I wish you all very well. And I hope that you go out and create relationship anarchy community wherever you are, and explore and find out whether or not it's a good fit for you. Oh, and the place that I practice the most is in the Relationship Anarchy Facebook group. So if you're interested, I can send you a link. I'll create a set of resources that I mentioned in this class and send it out to all the participants in the classroom. So thank you, and have a wonderful night, everybody. Hope maybe I'll see you at Fusion. We can dance together and co-create beautiful, amazing oxytocin. Bless you.